Hey everybody! Tonight we're diving into the thrilling world of economics. Don't worry, it's not as boring as it sounds. We're talking about GDP, or Gross Domestic Product, which is kind of like a report card for a country's economy. In the simplest terms, GDP measures the total value of all the goods and services produced within a country's borders over a specific time, usually a year. It's like adding up everything from haircuts to iPhones, from cars to concert tickets, to see how much economic activity is happening. Now you might be wondering, why should we care about this jumble of numbers? Well, GDP is a big deal because it gives us a snapshot of a country's economic health. A growing GDP generally means more jobs, more income, and a higher standard of living. On the flip side, a shrinking GDP can signal trouble, like a recession or economic downturn. So next time you hear politicians bragging about GDP growth or economists fretting over a GDP decline, you'll know what all the fuss is about. It's basically the economic scoreboard that everyone's watching. Now let's break down this GDP thing a bit further. Imagine GDP as a giant pie chart. It's divided into 4 main slices, each representing a key component of economic activity. The biggest slice is usually consumer spending. This is all the money we spend on things we need and want, like food, clothes, housing, and entertainment. Think of it as the treat-yourself portion of the economy. Next up is investment, which includes spending by businesses on things like new factories, equipment, and software. Basically, it's the money businesses pour back into growing and expanding. Then we have government spending, which covers everything from building roads and bridges to paying for education and healthcare. It's the government's contribution to the economic pie. And finally, we have net exports, which is the difference between a country's exports, goods and services sold to other countries, and imports, goods and services bought from other countries. If a country exports more than it imports, it adds to GDP. If it imports more, it subtracts from GDP. So, there you have it, the 4 main ingredients of the GDP pie. Each slice plays a crucial role in determining a country's overall economic performance. Let's take a quick trip around the world to see how GDP plays out in real life. First stop, the United States, the land of supersized everything, including its economy. With a massive GDP, the US is like the heavyweight champion of the global economy. This means it has a lot of economic clout, but it also means a lot of eyes are on its economic performance. Next, we have China, the rising star of the global economy. China's GDP has been growing at an astonishing rate for decades, fueled by its massive manufacturing sector and booming consumer market. It's like the ambitious newcomer that everyone's watching. And then there's India, a land of immense potential. India's GDP is still relatively small compared to the US or China, but it's growing rapidly. With a young and vibrant population, India has the potential to become a major economic powerhouse in the coming years. These are just a few examples of how GDP can paint a picture of a country's economic standing in the world. It's a useful tool for comparing the size and performance of different economies. Section 4. GDP and the Big Picture. Insights and Limitations. Now, while GDP can be a handy tool for measuring economic activity, it's important to remember that it's not a perfect measure. It's like trying to judge a book by its cover. You might get some clues, but you're not getting the whole story. One of the biggest limitations of GDP is that it doesn't account for the distribution of wealth. A country can have a high GDP, but if all the wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, it doesn't mean everyone is living large. Another issue is that GDP doesn't factor in environmental impact. A country could be churning out tons of pollution and depleting its natural resources, but as long as it's producing goods and services, its GDP will look rosy. It's like judging a factory solely on its output without considering the smog billowing from its smokestacks. And let's not forget about all the unpaid work that happens outside the formal economy, like childcare, housework, and volunteer work. These activities are essential for a well-functioning society, but they don't get counted in GDP because no money is directly exchanged. So, while GDP can give us a general idea of a country's economic health, it's important to remember that it's just one piece of the puzzle. Section 5. Beyond the dollar sign, a holistic view of progress. As we've seen, GDP can be a useful but flawed measure of a nation's progress. It tells us how much we're producing, but it doesn't tell us how we're living, how we're treating our planet, or how we're distributing the fruits of our labor. To get a complete picture of a nation's well-being, we need to look beyond the dollar sign and consider other factors like education, healthcare, environmental sustainability, and social equality. It's like looking at a person's overall health, not just their weight. So the next time you hear someone touting a country's impressive GDP figures, remember to ask yourself, what's the story behind the numbers? Are people living happy and fulfilling lives? Is the environment being protected? Is opportunity being shared fairly? Because true progress is about more than just economic growth. It's about creating a society where everyone has the chance to thrive.